Um, I wrote my first book more than 20 years ago. I've been in the software world for many more years than that. And there's one thing I know for sure, and that is anything that's 20 years old in software is really, it's either a classic or it's out of date. Uh, things that things from 2 decades ago are not the way to be thinking about things today. It's time to move on and think about how do we look at software as we go forward and into the future. And so, with that said, I want to talk about this concept that I have of product thinking. And product thinking is it's all about learning. It's about learning, first of all, what product and service we should create so that customers are going to love it. So we have to understand what that means for customers. We have to figure out how to build it and how to deliver it. And we have to be able to be sure that once we do that, it's going to be efficient and it's going to be reliable and safe. And we need to learn how to do this in a sustainable way because we have to make enough revenue so we can stay in business in the long term and support our customers and keep our employees employed. So those are the things that we have to think about with product thinking. And one of the things you have to start with is, why are customers hiring your product? Okay, so who is your customer? What person is your customer? What do they look like? What is their job that they're trying to get done? What kind of job are they trying to happen? So let's take a look here. Here we see that paraglider pilot is all the way off of the cliff and down into the near the fjord below in Norway. This is. And there you see, oh, there's a landing spot. And I'll show you that in a minute with just a second here. See, there's a landing spot. And there they are about to land. Now, with product thinking, let's say that this is your customer, this pilot. You map the customer journey. They flew from up on the top of the cliff where we took these pictures, by the way, down to the farm below and establish empathy. Get inside of their head and think, what is the biggest friction that person has? What kind of thing is the biggest friction at this moment? And it's not obvious, but can you guess what it is? They just landed. And the biggest friction is they had so much fun, they want to do it again. But there they are, all the way down there, and the hill is way far above, and they have to get all of their gear packed up, and then they have to get back up to the top. So if we're going to do a product for that customer, here's a good one. Let's provide the transportation to get them back up to the top. That would be our product because their biggest friction is getting from the bottom with all of their gear to the top. So that's the job they need done. They need somebody to transport them up to the top. And that's what you think about when you think what job it is that customers are hiring your product to do. So here is a way to look at the kind of things we have to do in product thinking. We have customers, we have technology, and then there's economics. And we have to say all three of those are part of product thinking. The customers have to find our product desirable. The technology has to be feasible. The economics have to be viable. And we have to learn how to do all three of those things at the same time. So here is something from Marty Kagan of the Silicon Product Group that I found really interesting. He said, there are really two kinds of teams that you can have out there. There's such a thing as a product team or a feature team. And the question is, what kind of team do you have in your company? Here's what a product team does. They're responsible for all three things: customer value, economic viability, and the engineering necessary to make the technology work. A feature team is responsible just for the technology and for the engineering, and somebody else is responsible to ensure customer value and ensure economic viability. And it's not the people who are doing the technology development. Now, the question is, in your world, do you have feature teams or do you have product teams? Now, I'm going to talk to you about a world in Norway, that there's more to Norway than just the fjords. And this is a company in Oslo called Iterate. And my story here goes back to 2007. We did our first workshop in Oslo, and there were 3 students in the class. And after class, they came up to us and they said, we are quitting our jobs and we're going to start a new company and we want to create a great place to work. Now, they were just a few years out of college, and I was thinking, yeah, good luck with that. But as a matter of fact, they took us out to dinner and we talked about various things. And a couple of years later, we discovered, sure enough, they did. They created their own company. The company is called Iterate, a very successful consulting business. In fact, because their goal was to make it a great place to work, by 2010, they had become the number 3 best workplace in Norway in the small company category. And for the next 10 years, they were somewhere in the top 4. They were number 1 or they were number 4. Typically, they were 2 or 3 of the best workplaces in Norway. They created a great company to work. But now it's 2016. And the question is, at that point in time, the question is, what dream are they pursuing? Because in 2016, they'd been around for a good decade, and they were still trying to become very, very good place to work. So this is a quote from a blog of Anders Hargeto, who was one of the founders. He said, one of our employers told us in 2016 that he was unhappy, although customers gave him top reviews. So we asked him what was wrong. And he said, I'm happy about the feedback, but it feels like I'm working with my left hand. And he pinpointed a feeling that pretty much we found across the company. We had great clients. We had challenging innovation projects. We worked on behalf of them, but that work was becoming a ceiling to innovation and to growth of ourselves. So we asked all the employers, how can we go further and make this a better place to work? How can we become top performing tech consultancy in our market? And what we discovered was, instead of looking at ways to scale the model further, we decided that it had started dawning on us that the model itself was becoming the problem. So they decided our best people are limited as consultants. They don't have a seat at the decision-making table. They can't follow their passion. They can't reach their full potential. Our business model is a ceiling to innovation because we are solving other people's problems and we can't follow our own interest and our own passion. And why can't we do something about it? Because there's some of the founders were interested in starting companies. Many of the consultants were interested in some of their own ideas that they would like to pursue. Why can't we nurture startups and fund it with consulting revenue? Well, there's a really good answer to that question, why you can't nurture startups and fund it with consulting revenue, because most companies that try to do that fail, because they're completely different business objectives that you need. For consultancy, it's billable hours and that sort of thing. Whereas when you go to startups, it's exactly not that. It's how successful is your product in the market. And for consultancies, it's how rapidly you can get the job done, how productive you can be. For startups, it's something very different they discovered. So the first thing they had to do was align incentives. And one of the ways that they did that was they decided they were going to limit their consulting profits to 3%. And all other money they made with consulting was going to be poured into anything to support a venture business, making it plenty of time and making it easy for everybody in the whole company to come up with new ideas and to build those new ideas into a business. So if you want to read more about this, there's down at the bottom of this slide, there is the the URL for the blog. So they told us in 2016 they were going to start up this venture business, and I'm thinking, well, I'm not that surprised, but good luck, because starting up a venture business is a whole other game, and it's really difficult to succeed in. 4 years later, if you do the math, you will discover the pandemic happened. And at that point in time, they were still trying to get some startups started. But the consulting revenue in Oslo just disappeared. And at that point in time, they were rather lucky that they had this other part of their business. It took them 2 whole weeks, because they had, extra people and lots of interest in how do we do ventures. And there was a startup nearby that needed some automation so that they could do the last mile delivery, called Porter Buddy. And so they quickly threw all of their effort into getting those guys online and getting it working. And it was immediately and immensely successful because it solved the pandemic problem. It was quickly acquired, and the company, because of the way they structured, they benefited from that, as well as the people that worked on it. And during that next year and a half, 2 years, 3 more ventures were spun off as separate entities. One of them is Woolet. This is one of the founders, Kim Opiskowski, and he was one of the original founders, and he was trying to work on Woolet. And what he discovered is he couldn't be the head of a company or a senior executive in the company and also work on a venture. So he kind of had to walk away from running Iterate to working exclusively on this venture, which is now a very successful company where you can contact knitters directly, and they'll show you patterns and wool, and you can order exactly the sweater that you want knit, and it gets sent to you. So they'd finally moved beyond the Agile way of thinking. And to show you a little bit more about that, here's another founder. Here's Anders. It's the one that wrote that other blog also. And here's another blog that he wrote in Medium, and it was called Cheating on Agile. And in this blog, he said, we learned, and it took us a while, that all those Agile things that we thought were so important were actually not. Because the cause of startup failures is wrong market timing. You get something typically too early. The market isn't ready. You have founding teams that don't work well together. You have weak ideas that don't really have value. Those are the 3 most common causes of failure. And by the way, these are not practices. But if you are a venture nurturing company, you have to address those kinds of problems. So we found we had to do strategies that just simply broke the Agile rules. For example, we discovered that elapsed calendar time is a friend. You have to wait for the right market time. Woolet never got started until after the pandemic was pretty much wound down, and now it's quite successful, but it took 4 or 5 years for it to get working well. If you do this fast feedback and single focus like you're supposed to in Agile, you know what? It can lead you to not taking enough time and climbing one of those small mountains before you get to the real mountain that you need to climb. And it wastes a lot of time. Short iterations incentivize premature conclusions. If you force yourself to be fast, you're going to have to jump to some sort of conclusion. And if you don't take time to internalize what you're learning, you are probably going to start climbing that wrong mountain, and it won't be a successful business. And they also found that people should not be assigned to teams. They should try out teams, and not all teams work together. And so people should be able to try different teams and different ideas and find things that they're passionate about. And they should be able to easily leave and walk away from a team if they're not the right fit for the team that's working there. And, or they should be able to leave a team if they're not passionate about the product, and they should be encouraged to. The other thing they found is you don't want focus, you want lots and lots of ideas and figure out which ones work. Prioritization is not a concept in a startup venture nurturing environment. Don't prioritize things, try all kinds of things. Try out the stupidest ideas and bring them around so that they morph into something that makes sense. And the other thing is you shouldn't have short-term goals for teams because that's going to bring you down away from the learning that you have to do to have a successful startup. You have to be aligned around a high-level vision, yes, but not around short-term goals. Very different rules than the Agile rules that we've grown up with. And here they are. They're three founders. This is Rui, and this is Kim, who started Willet, and this is Anders, who wrote those blogs. And here they are about 6 months ago. Very pleased and very happy. The third founder from the original Iterate, Seaman Jorgensen, left in 2016, and he and a co-founder started up their own company, which installs solar panels on residential roofs and tries to make it as easy as buying jeans online. And it's called Otovo, and it is also a very successful startup. He's not with Iterate anymore, but in 2020, they stopped trying to compete for the Norwegian Best Place to Work Award, and instead they competed worldwide with companies all around the world at Fast Company, and they were number 50 on Fast Company's best workplaces for innovators in the world. They were very proud of that, but in 2022, they made in 2022, Fast Company divided those best places into international outside of the US and US companies, and they were listed as one of the 3 international standouts of best places to work for innovators. And at the same time, they received a $100 million NOK investment. They had, by that time, spun out 20 companies, some of them extremely successful, not everyone, but a whole bunch of them, and counting. They continue to be a really great place to nurture new ventures. So they were successful. And they were successful because they stopped doing the let other people tell you what to do and started creating product teams instead of feature teams. So if you have a technology-powered product, a lot of different disciplines have to go into making it valuable for customers, viable economically, and great engineering. So you need a multidiscipline team. Product teams, not feature teams, they should have passionate members who work well together. And if they don't, that needs to get fixed. And it needs to be okay for people to leave and different people to join. They need to focus on jobs to be done, things that customers really want and are going to value. They need to decide for themselves how they're going to spend their time and not have somebody tell them how to spend their time. And they need to take their time so that they can think. And they need to be responsible for the long-term success of the product in a way that's measured the way product success is measured, with market value and customer satisfaction. And that's the thing that they should be judged on. So if you want a successful product, it has to be a product that customers want. Here we see solar panel on roof. That happens to be our roof, but Siemens has created a whole bunch of solar panels on roof. And customers these days, given the price of electricity and all, they really want it. So the team needs to understand the customer context. Where's the friction? Where is something that is annoying people that could get fixed? A product team has to ensure that there is value. They need to understand the job to be done, the problems to be solved. And you need to understand why your product is the best way to do that job or solve the problem. Because if there are other ways, who needs the new way? And it has to be easy for your product to find, easy to adopt, and easy to use. Remember, the problem is already being solved. And so just switching to from the way they're solving it now to your product can be more energy than it's worth. And the other thing that products need are successful economics, sustainable economics. It doesn't mean that they have to make a ton of profit, but it does mean that they have to have economic viability. So it's important to understand the current economics about why that job is worth doing, why the problem is worth solving, and how it gets solved today, and how much that costs, and how much friction it causes. They need to understand the competition, what's different about this product and the other ways to do the job, and to do the whole job. And why is it so much better than the status quo that people are going to bear the cost of switching? And they need to create sustainable pricing. It has to be attractive, it has to be fair, but it also has to be enough so that they can stay in business and manage the value stream from concept to cash. Now, the reason I have this picture here is that this is an old borax train, and it's in the desert in the desert south in Death Valley of the United States. And at late 1800s, for 6 years, borax, which is stuff that's on the bottom of dried up lakes, was collected from there and hauled by very long mule teams many, many miles to get onto a train and go out to market. Now, borax is still a very interesting and well-used commodity, but those mules didn't last because they weren't economically viable. They eventually, and actually rather quickly, got converted into trains. There was train tracks to all of these mines, and that was no longer an economic solution because, mules can be a little bit of a friction. So let's also go to the technology piece, because that's really where the engineering comes in. If you have a complex technology product, it needs to be built on great engineering. Now, the very first thing you need to understand about engineering is that engineers don't do what they're told, they solve problems that they're given. So you have to start with a problem, not a solution. And I'm going to talk about a different kind of engineering. I'm going to talk about infrastructure engineering. My son happens to be a civil engineer. And here is one of his favorite engineering projects. This is a Scottish canal, Fairkirk wheel. And it is a wheel. If you take a look down here in this picture on the right-hand corner, just a minute, I am trying to get my laser pointer down here. There's a picture here, and there is a circle, and here is a canal that comes up, and there's a canal that goes off. And in the canal boats come, they get to the wheel, and they circle around, and they get to the bottom. It's a very tall wheel, but if you take a look at why it's there, this is Glasgow over here, and there's Edinburgh, and here's the Firth of Clyde, and there's the Firth of Forth, and there's a canal, has long since been a canal to get goods from one to the other. And also another canal that goes off to Edinburgh, and right here, there used to be canals. In fact, there were 11 different locks in between here and here to connect those two canals. But by this time, those locks had all been filled in, and there was farmland, and there was no way to connect them, except that the engineers were given the job, figure out how to connect them. And this was in the late 90s, and they had to come 24 meters from the top here down to the bottom. And so they designed a wheel. And the interesting thing about the wheel is it has a couple of gears, and it takes a tank down and a tank up, and then the wheel turns around each tank. And because each tank is mostly the ballast that moves the thing down, it takes very little energy, just water in the tank, like any other lock, to move this from the bottom to the top. And so there'll be some boats in the bottom canal and boats in the top canal, and the wheel will turn. We actually got on it and we did it. And it is just an amazing piece of engineering. So if you think about engineering like that, like infrastructure engineering, nobody told those engineers how to solve that problem. I will tell you that for sure, because they started with, here we have 24 meters and we have no place to build locks. How are we going to get the canal boats down from the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top? And how are we going to do it in a way that is economically sustainable, doesn't use a whole lot of power? So they have to understand both the value and the risk for customers. It was essentially not going to be a highway for goods, mostly a highway for tourists. And although that's nice, the engineering value of their wheel was also, it was a tourist attraction, and it is a tourist attraction. They have to appreciate the economics. They couldn't make a really expensive wheel. They had to know the technology of how this kind of balance and movement works. And they have to know, if you're building something with technology, you have to know where it's heading in the future. Got to get the architecture right. And the other thing is, anytime you're doing a technology project, engineering requires that you align incentives so that the people who are doing the engineering know that what's expected of them is excellent engineering and delivering outcomes that customers truly appreciate, not points or features or anything like that, because those are intermediate, temporary things, sub goals that may or may not be what really is necessary to make the product successful. And you also have to ensure that the teams that are work well together, and the teams care. They care about their work and they care about their customers. All of this is necessary when we're doing engineering. And in fact, these are the things that are more necessary than all of those practices that we put in a package and called Agile. So when it comes down to this last one, ensure that teams care about their work and about their customers and work well together. But how do you do that? I've talked about most of these others, not the architecture part, but I'll leave that to you. But how do you ensure that this stuff happens? And so one last thing I want to talk about is leadership, because leadership is necessary. And my version of leadership never actually has matched the kind of leadership that people talk about with Agile, not real closely. Instead, I'm going to look at a different kind of complex technology-powered product. And in these kinds of products, we are looking for responsible product leaders. What is a responsible product leader? Well, let's take the model that SpaceX uses when they're designing say a booster rocket that's going to go up into space. It has a lot of places. It has a payload, a first stage, an interstage, second stage, has some very fancy engines here. They're put together in a package, has landing legs, gill fins, and every single one of those is a component. And every single one of those pieces has a responsible engineer responsible for understanding how to make that thing the best thing they can and how to make sure it does its job as part of the whole system. And this guy, John Matori, has been the launch director at SpaceX since 2012. And he basically says this: SpaceX operates on the philosophy of responsibility because they believe that no engineering process in existence can replace the philosophy of responsibility for getting things done right and done efficiently. What is that philosophy of responsibility? It means that engineers are responsible for the design and develop of a component and for ensuring that their component operates properly and for understanding and making sure that it does its job as part of the overall system. So you have a hierarchy of responsible engineers, maybe one responsible for the whole thing, and then responsible engineers for each component, and each component has to know their job in the whole picture, not just their thing. They can't just optimize their thing. So I want to talk about, and I'm going to do this with a video, the role of a product leader, the way that I envision it. And I'm going to let you listen to this video here. So, what I would like to ask you is, who in that video is the product leader? Take a guess, and I'll show you who I think of as the product leader. There. The conductor, the one who brings everybody together, keeps them all together, all on the same beat, puts the emotion in it, and makes sure that it's great. And anytime you think about a product leader, maybe you'll think of that, the Ode to Joy, and think about how a product leader doesn't have to have fancy clothes on. You might not even see them very much, but make sure that everybody is together. And here we have our next generation product leaders right here. So in conclusion, I would ask you to think about product, not features. Think about engineering, really good engineering. And think about leadership. And figure out how to make all of those things happen together as you do software engineering. Because I think it's time to move beyond Agile. Thank you.